Rachel is going to speak first, and she is the director of the International Young Israel Movement and the Jewish Agency for Israel's Agunah and Get-Refusal project. She has a doctorate in Talmud from Bar-Ilan University, and she is a rabbinic court advocate. In addition to that, she is also the author of Mini'ei Einayach Midima, Heskemei Kedam Nisu'in Limini'at Siruv Get, and she's also one of the authors of the Heskem L'chvod Hadadi. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you Rachel Levmore.
I wanted to explain to you tonight not exactly how the Agreement for Mutual Respect of the Heskem L'chvod Hadadi works, but rather to talk about the background and why it's necessary and what it brings about, how it actually brings about a strengthened Jewish family unit. So if we look around at our lives today, if we stop from the rat race and we think for a minute, we realize that all of us are living in two worlds at the same time. Not exactly two worlds, but rather we're living through two different Weltanschauungs, two different philosophies of life. Everyone, whether we're a religious Jew or an irreligious Jew, it doesn't matter. If you're Jewish and you're living in the state of Israel or even in the diaspora, you're living out of two different philosophies of life. That of what we were born and bred with, meaning democracy, liberalism, personal autonomy, civil rights, all of that. It comes naturally to us. And we're also products of 2,000 years of tradition. Whether we stick to the letter of halakha, whether we don't stick to the letter of halakha, and we make our own determinations. We've still got this package of 2,000 years of tradition behind us. And these two, we don't realize on a day-to-day basis that we're functioning from within both of these life's philosophies. Sometimes we draw upon one to answer a question, sometimes we draw upon the other to answer a question, and sometimes they meet. I'll just give you an example from recent days, right? It was just Sukkot. When somebody builds himself a house, and then he builds himself a patio where he intends to put his sukkah, he calls upon his building contractor to consult with him. What is he going to pave the patio with? Is he going to use asphalt? Is he going to use marble? What is he going to use? And it doesn't occur to him to ask the rabbi, what should I pave my patio with? He just asks his building contractor, and that's a result of modern day living. But when he builds his sukkah, and it's time for him to put a roof on his sukkah, he has to go to tradition. He'll have to call, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, he'll have to call a rabbi. He doesn't ask the building contractor, even though he's building an edifice, he doesn't ask the building contractor, with what should I build the ceiling? What material should I use for the ceiling? He asks the rabbi, what materials are needed to use the ceiling, or he figured it out himself because he learned it through traditional learning. So that was an example of when the two don't meet. But sometimes both ways of life meet, and they can also enrich each other, and sometimes they can clash to the point of an explosion. And there's no better example of the two threads becoming intertwined, knotted even, and causing tension than the rabbinical courts of the State of Israel. Because the rabbinical courts of the State of Israel were given complete and total jurisdiction over matters of personal status of Jews who live in the State of Israel. Either they can be residents or citizens of the State of Israel. And that matters of personal status means marriage and divorce. You know that there's no civil divorce in the State of Israel, and this is why. Because the civil law, the law passed in the Knesset, gave the rabbis, the rabbinical courts, total jurisdiction over matters of personal status, marriage and divorce of Jews. Even more interesting and complex is that in the second clause of that law, it specifically states that all the adjudication and all the reasoning of the courts, of the rabbinical courts, should be done in accordance with din Torah. din Torah. What that means is, I mean, if you just go in, there's a locked door over there, which is a Beit Midrash. And Beit Midrash is full of Gemarot and of the Shulchan Aruch and everything in there, which that means that any lawyer that you go into, any lawyer's office, will have a bookcase such as this, and behind him when he's sitting at his desk, of course, and there he will have the entire codex of the state of Israel, a real estate law, a criminal law, the financial laws, right? And what should be there, if he doesn't have it, well, he probably has it on a DVD, is the entire library in that room over there. The entire Shulchan Aruch, including from the Mishnah, through the Gemara, through the Achronim, through the Rishonim, through the Shulchan Aruch, through the Achronim, till the Achronim, all of that is part of the Codex of the Law of Israel in terms of marriage and divorce. It's part of the civil law system. Okay, so in America, matters of a divorce with a Jewish divorce through a get is applicable to only those who marry under an Orthodox auspices. But in Israel, every Jew who gets married through the services of the state marries in accordance with halacha, irrelevant if they're Orthodox or if they're atheists, and everything in between, of course. Makes no difference. Once they're married, once they are registered to be married through the state of Israel, which is a service that every democratic state gives its people, they are getting married in an Orthodox manner. Okay, so that's very nice. They have a very nice traditional chuppah, the kiddushin, in a beautiful way. However, we all know that right now the divorce statistic in Israel is more than 30%. And that's a statistic. It's an unfortunate statistic, but we have to, as mature individuals, we have to deal with it. So, we have to be prepared to deal with unfortunate aspects of life as well. Okay, so we said, all right, in order to get divorced in the state of Israel, you have to go to the Beit Din Rabbani, because the civil law gave the Beit Din Rabbani, the rabbinical courts, the right, the total jurisdiction. But let me just explain what that means. It means we do have civil family courts. So what happens if I want a divorce and I go to Givat Shaul and I walk into the civil family court and I say, I would like to sue for divorce, I'd like to open a file. The clerk or the judge will say to me, Gveret, I don't have jurisdiction to end your marriage. You have to go up the hill, down the street, make a right turn, and go to the Beit Din Rabbani. They're the ones that have jurisdiction. I am a judge of the civil family court, but I don't have jurisdiction to deal with this. Now, this presents us with a little bit of problem, and the problem is applicable to men and women. We'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to clarify again, makes it clear to us, have a clear picture, because I'm speaking in English, and you're all listening to me in English, which means that most likely each one of you has an Anglo background. So wherever you came from, or if you watch TV and you see what goes on in divorce cases outside of the state of Israel, in other democratic states, there are two major differences between getting a divorce in Chutz La'aretz, in the diaspora, and getting a divorce in the state of Israel. What are the two major differences? All of the democratic states have family courts. So the first difference is that in the United States, in England, in Europe, wherever, what have you, right, South America, Australia, take your pick, the judge, who's not part of the marriage, right? He's a third party. He's outside of the marriage, right? He's not married to the couple. The judge is the one that issues a decree that terminates the union between the husband and the wife. He bangs his gavel on the table and he says, I hereby now decree that you are divorced. With that bang and that decree, he is the one, the judge, who is the arm of the state. He changes the personal status from those two people from married to divorced, even if one of them is yelling, I don't want a divorce. I love him. Why should we get divorced? You're ruining my life. It's a little bump in the road. We shouldn't be divorced. But the minute that the judge, who's, again, I remind you, an outside party to the couple, the minute he decrees that they are divorced, he has changed their personal status from married to divorce. Our dayanim, whether it is in the Beit Din Rabbanim Mamlachti in Israel, or whether it is in Batei Din, anywhere in the rest of the world, in the diaspora, do not have that power. They don't have that power. They cannot use the vehicle of divorce to terminate a marriage. The only individuals that can terminate a marriage through the vehicle of divorce are the couple themselves. The man, by Din Torah, the man has to give the get to the woman out of his own free will. And Din de Rabbanan, on the level of a rabbinic ordinance, the woman has to accept the get out of her own free will. Only when both of them do this out of agreement, then that act of giving the get and accepting the get, that is what changes their personal status. It's not the dayan or the three dayanim that are sitting in the courtroom that change their status. It's the husband and the wife themselves. They're the ones that have control over their personal status. So philosophically, you can say that this differs from Western liberal approach in that in Judaism, the same way that you cannot force somebody to marry, if you carry a woman in a white dress down the aisle and stick her under the chuppah, and she's kicking and yelling, and she's saying, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it, and somehow the Chatan manages to put a ring on her finger, and he says, Harayat Mekudesh Li, and she's yelling, I don't want it, I don't want it. There's no Kiddushin there. Okay? But the Kiddushin occur, the entrance into marriage, into the sanctity of marriage, is through the agreement of both the Chatan and the Kala. So Judaism says now, in order to exit the marriage, you also need the agreement of the Chatan and Kala, and you cannot coerce them to exit the marriage. So if one of them is yelling, I don't want to leave the marriage, the marriage still stands. The marriage still stands. So the great problem arises, and if you do coerce, particularly a man, if you coerce the man to give a get, it's called a get museh, a coerced get, and it's invalid. It's invalid. In other words, it looked like a paper, a regular, it's the same paper, it sort of looks like a ketubah, it's written in a safut stam, a sofer writes it up. It can look identical to a kosher get, but it's not. It's not. If he was coerced into it, then even if he gave the get and put it in the woman's hand and the woman grabbed it, right, that is not a kosher get. But what happens if the woman thinks it's a kosher get? She leaves the room and she thinks that she is a single woman, that she's free to remarry. She's remarriageable. However, she's still an eshet ish. She's still a married woman. And all the laws that apply to a married woman still apply to her. Meaning, she cannot have intimate relations with a man other than her husband. And if she does, then it's considered gilui arayot, adultery, one of the big three transgressions in Judaism. And any children born of that separate union will be mamzerim, through no fault of their own. So this is an untenable situation. But I get back to the second big difference between getting divorced in Judaism, according to halakha, to Jewish law, and getting divorced in any other democratic country. That is no fault divorce, as opposed to having to prove fault in your spouse in order to have a divorce. This is not the concept of no fault divorce is really not that old. In other words, there were states in the United States that until the 1980s still had if you wanted a divorce unilaterally, if it wasn't done amicably by agreement, but if you wanted a divorce from your spouse, irrelevant if you're male or female, and the spouse did not agree to the divorce, then you had to go to the court and you had to prove grounds for divorce. And every state in the United States had a list of different grounds. Like it could be adultery, it could be abandonment, it could be a prison term of 3 years or more. In other words, if he was in prison only for 1.5 years, that wasn't grounds, and he was a criminal, that wasn't grounds for divorce if the man didn't want to accept the divorce, for example. There was a definitive lack of support, failure to support. There was a specific list, but by the time the 1980s came around, in practical terms, all the states of the United States, except for New York, which recently made it better, all the states in the United States have no-fault divorce. All you have to do is go into the courtroom and you have to say there are irreconcilable differences and you don't have to prove any grounds, which is interesting because you don't have to wash any dirty laundry. In other words, you don't have to say what was the matter with your marriage. So you don't have to wash any dirty laundry in a public sphere, so to speak. In Judaism, according to halacha, there's only divorce by proving grounds. You have to claim the fault and you have to prove the fault with 2 kosher eidim. Now, this is not doable these days. We don't live in a little shtetl where all the next door neighbors can hear and even see what's going on inside the 4 walls of a family's home. Here, if someone is even an alcoholic, let's just take that. If someone is an alcoholic and manages to be an alcoholic inside his or her 4 walls, then nobody else is going to know about it. And where do you have 2 kosher eidim that are going to testify to the fact that he is an alcoholic or she is an alcoholic? So that's very difficult. And and you put that together. Now I'm just going to tie the two things together. What happens here? Someone wants a divorce. Let's take it. It doesn't matter when I'm speaking, unless I specifically say otherwise. Whatever I say about women goes for men, and what I say about men goes for women, unless I specifically say this only applies to women or this only applies to men. Okay? So it doesn't matter. It's like the employment ads. At the bottom of the employment ads, it says so all the language here goes for zachar and nekeva. All right. So what happens is, if a woman wants a divorce from her husband for whatever reason, she's got grounds. He's an alcoholic. He's an addict of some sort. He could be a porno addict. All right. Any examples I give you are real live examples that I've dealt with. Right? It could be a guy that's supposed to be studying in yeshiva, and instead he's watching porno all day on his computer. Or it can be that he hits the children, not that he hits her, that he really, really physically abuses the children. Okay, so but he does that only inside his 4 walls. But it's something that is socially unacceptable, especially if the guy's religious, right? It's not acceptable, and he would be embarrassed if anybody knew that he was watching porno all day. So the woman comes to a Beit Din Rabbani, as opposed to a civil court, where there's no fault divorce, and the judge himself can terminate the union, right? She comes to a Beit Din Rabbani, and she needs the Beit Din to rule for a divorce. She needs them to rule for a divorce. Because if they don't agree that there is room here for a divorce, then they're not going to arrange a divorce. And the law says that the only way you can get divorced is through the Beit Din Rabbani. They have sole jurisdiction. So you have to go to the Beit Din Rabbani because that's the court. That's the arm of the state that will write down that you're no longer married. So she has to go to the Beit Din Rabbani. She appears in front of the Beit Din Rabbani, and she says to them, I want a divorce. And they say, why do you want a divorce, Gveret? She is in a complete catch-22 position. Completely catch-22 position. Why? she has to tell the Dayanim, she has to prove grounds for divorce. This is assuming that it's not an amicable divorce, that he says, I love my wife, I want to continue being married. There's no reason that we should have a divorce. He wants to stay married, right?
This is a completely amicable divorce.
What?
You're talking about a completely amicable divorce now.
Not amicable.
Not amicable.
Okay, from now on, all the divorces I'm talking about are not amicable. Okay?
Sorry.
Not amicable. Okay? She says, I need a divorce because he's an alcoholic, because he's a porno addict, he's supposed to be sitting in yeshiva. I married him, he told me he was going to sit in yeshiva and learn, and I was going to support him, and he sits at home all day and he watches porno movies, and etc., right? Or he hits the children, or any one of these things. She has to say it in front of the Dayanim. Now, what's his reaction? He says, Ma patom, he mishakeret. She's lying. She's making it up, right? But deep down, he knows it's the truth. Because the truth is, a woman's not going to come and say that because it's deeply embarrassing to herself as well. Particularly if he's hitting the children and she can't protect the children. It's deeply, deeply, existentially embarrassing for a woman to admit that she can't protect her own children. And she says that to the Dayanim. And then she has to try to prove it. So whatever way she tries to prove it. Okay, so he yells out, she's lying, she's lying, she's lying. And then the diyun, the session is over, the court session. How is he reacting? He is shamed terribly that she let out the dirty secret that he had in front of the 3 venerable rabbis. These are the most venerable rabbanim in the state of Israel. And she told them his secret. So he is deeply shamed, and more than that, the shame moves away very quickly, and he is furious. He's in a fit of rage. And this is a natural reaction on his part. And what does he say to her? Now you'll really never see a get. Because he's so angry at her. Okay, this is a process that people have to go through in Israel. And I just want to step back for a moment and just explain to you that once had a course with Dr. David Ribner. Anybody know him? Okay, and he's a professor of social work. And he explained, from the scientific knowledge, he explained the cycle of divorce. In other words, what happens psychologically and sociologically to the people. And I remember, he said, when someone doesn't understand that his marriage is in need of a divorce, and you come to him and you say, I want a divorce, to him or to her, you say, I want a divorce, then he's shocked. And he has pain. Pain, real pain. Pain that brings to tears. He's hurt deeply. Because he thinks that they're happily married and they're in love. And then you say, no, I'm not. It's pain. There is nothing you can do to eliminate that pain. That pain exists. You cannot erase it. You cannot prevent it. It's human nature. Then, what happens in Israel, and also can happen in general, is that the pain turns to anger. What? After all I've done for you, you want a divorce? You want to break up our family unit? You want to break up our marriage? Okay, and then, this is natural. Then, the anger, if you let it go on too long, I'm just describing you the process without a prenuptial agreement, what happens? The anger turns into rage. The rage turns into venom. The venom turns into vengeance, right? He wants to hurt the spouse. And it can reach all the way to self-destruction. Not only self-destruction, but destruction of the children as well. In other words, he's so out to vindicate himself and to attack the spouse who caused all of this mess, right, in his eyes, who caused the mess, that he's willing to hurt the spouse and hurt the children and hurt himself, pay the price of hurting himself also, self-destruct along the way. This has to stop. This is ruining the Jewish family unit. How so? Because when you say to me, "Ma pitom," if somebody who wants a divorce is ruining a Jewish family unit, and I'm telling you, healthy Jewish family units that also need a divorce will continue to stay married. But 30% or more, it's more by now, 35% of the couples that are getting married this year in the state of Israel are going to need a divorce. And if we allow them to go through a divorce that turns into one of get-refusal, either by the woman or by the man. Remember, the man needs the woman's agreement to divorce, and the woman needs the man's agreement to divorce. The Beit Din cannot arrange the divorce without them both agreeing to it. They cannot change their personal status without their acquiescence. So if we allow them to fall down the deep pit of anger, turning into rage, turning into vengeance, then they will not be able to rebuild their lives. However, and not only that, their children will witness a terrible manner of a relationship. If you have an amicable divorce, the children understand this is a respect for one another. They decided they couldn't continue to be married. However, they still respect each other, and they can continue to co-parent out of cooperation. They're still parents to the joint children, to the same children. They have to be able to cooperate in order to bring up the children in a healthy manner, and they have to be role models to show them what a healthy relationship consists of, even if you have to split up. But if you allow people to fall down that deep pit and not be able to climb out, you're ruining multi-generational lives. You're ruining each one of the spouse's lives, because if there ever is a get afterwards, the two of them will be so traumatized by this years-long emotionally laden emotionally packed battle, that they won't be able to trust a new partner. It will be very difficult for them to remarry and build another healthy relationship. And the children of the younger generation won't know how to enter another relationship, or their own relationships, with a feeling of trust and confidence and pure love. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something to what you're saying, is that many singles who've never been married but know people who go through this or hear about it will also be traumatized and not necessarily want to get married because they don't want to be the next victim.
Yeah. You're 100% right, because the circles of trauma spread. When there is get-refusal, the circles of trauma spread. In other words, we've got the couple and we've got their children. And they're actively involved. In other words, the children are used as weapons, one against the other, outside the Beit Din and inside the Beit Din. It's terrible. It's just simply terrible what I've witnessed. It is parental alienation, and worse than that, they're really used as weapons, the children. But beyond that, the parents, let's take the parents and the siblings of each one of those spouses, and take their children, and then go on to the friends, as you say, who witness this. And then people take sides, right? And people take sides, and if it's in a small community or in a given shul, there was a shul here in Shimon Tzaddik that was torn apart, and rightfully so. Rightfully so torn apart, because the rabbi there was protecting his son, who really was a get-refuser. I was involved in that case. And the shul was torn apart. This is terrible. We have to prevent this from happening for our own mental health, emotional health, and to be able to form healthy Jewish family units, because the Jewish family unit is the foundation of a healthy Jewish society. With divorce, without divorce, doesn't make a difference. They're also the building blocks of a healthy society. You have a question?
Yeah. Why does the woman or man, whoever goes to the Beit Din and wants the one side to get, why do they have to say the reason?
That's the halacha, because the Beit Din will not agree to arrange a get against one of the couple's will if they go together and have a joint request to arrange a get, they're not going to get involved. They're not going to say, oh, go back and make shalom bayit. They're not going to say that if they go together. But if one wants and the other one doesn't, she or he has to prove grounds. And then you're looking for them to rule. There are 4 different levels of ruling in the Beit Din. You have to, the amount of convincing that one has to do to convince a Beit Din to rule a significant ruling that he or she, the man or the woman, is obligated to divorce, takes years. Years, I'm telling you, years. And what goes on during those years is a battle of wits, a battle of money. They both waste an enormous amount of money, if they have any, till they're penniless, because it goes on the lawyers. And here's another point. Unique to the state of Israel, to add more fuel to the fire, all right? Add more fuel to the fire is Israel's legal system. Remember I said that there was a Beit Din Rabbani who has sole jurisdiction on matters of personal status? But I said there does exist a civil family court in the state of Israel. So what's their job when you have a couple? So it turns out that the Beit Din Rabbani and the civil family court have parallel jurisdiction in all matters that are connected to a divorce. Not the divorce itself. In other words, not the arrangement of the get and not the changing of their personal status from married to remarriageable. But the children, custody of the children, support, child support, division of assets, even let's say education of the children, all these things that people fight about, there's parallel jurisdiction. These matters can be brought up either in the Beit Din Rabbani or they can be brought up in the civil family court. Okay, so where do we bring them up for a given couple? Two things go on. There's a race for jurisdiction. A race for jurisdiction, literally. Whoever sues first in the system, the civil or the rabbinic, of their choice, in the system of their choice, whoever sues first goes and files a suit. He has given jurisdiction to that system to deal with all the matters connected to a divorce. To the point that the computers stamp the papers with the exact time to the minute of when this was filed, because there's such a race. I'm going to get back to the race in a minute. The other phenomenon that this causes is that there's a battle for jurisdiction between the two systems themselves. In other words, the Beit Din Rabbani wants all the matters to be brought up connected to the get itself inside its court, and the civil court wants all the matters that were connected to the children and the monies to be brought up in the civil court. And when one couple, one sues here, one sues there, there's all sorts of legal tricks and the two courts are fighting each other for battle. And it reaches all the way up many times to Israel's Supreme Court to be settled. You know how much it costs to sue in the Supreme Court? Tens of thousands of shekalim. All this money is going invested, and not only money, it's years of a person's life. Now, here's the difference. Go ahead.
Can you talk about the ketubah at this point, how that plays into where you're
Yes,
at?
yeah, okay. I just want to say one thing about marital therapy, and then I'll talk about the ketubah. Fine. So, remember I said there's a race for jurisdiction between the couples, between the husband and the wife, each one trying to sue in the system that they think will be better for them. This ruins the concept of marital therapy in Israel. In Israel, it is highly unlikely to have good marital therapy. And many couples just don't go to marital therapy. Why? Let's say you have a couple here in Yerushalayim, right? And they're going through a crisis, and they recognize that they're going through a crisis. And but they're mature, and they say to each other, you know what, let's go to a marital therapist. Maybe a marital therapist can help us work through our troubles. and will regain, right? So she calls her mother and she says, you know, we've been having trouble. We've decided to go to a marital therapist because otherwise it looks like we're going to a divorce, with all the pain. So the mother says, that's very good. You go to a marital therapist because it's really a shame. It's a shame for you. It's a shame for the children. You should really try to get back together. But don't be stupid. Go to this lawyer and quickly, tomorrow morning, go to the lawyer and just in case it doesn't work out, you go sue in the civil court so that you will have granted jurisdiction to deal with the children and the monies in the civil court. Because the Beit Din, they don't do a fair deal for women. So go sue in the civil court. The same day, he goes to shul, and at the end of minyan, he says to the guy that he sits next to, that his friend, I'm having such a hard time with my wife, we're having such troubles, we decided to go to marital therapy. And he says, that's great. Go to marital therapy. I hope that you would conciliate and you work things, but don't be stupid. Here's a phone number of my brother-in-law, the lawyer, right? Or the Torah Rabbani. And he's very experienced. You go to him, and he will file a suit because it's a little complex. You have to know how to do it. It's not everybody can do it. To do it right and to grant jurisdiction to the Beit Din Rabbani, you have to go to a professional. He will file for you this afternoon in the Beit Din Rabbani, just that you know that you granted jurisdiction to the Beit Din Rabbani. Bezrat Hashem, you won't have to use it. But in case you have to use it, it'll be there already. It'll be in place. So the two of them, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, go to the marital therapist that they made an appointment with, and what marital therapists, any sort of therapist like that does, is that they instruct the couple to do trust building steps, right? The tzadei bonei imun, to build trust in one another. Baby steps to build trust in one another. But each one is sitting there saying, did he go to that court? And he says, did she go to that court? And behind my back? And the truth is, they are both going behind each other's back. And those are trust breaking steps, right? Trust destroying steps. So marital therapy has a very, very low chance of working in this country, either because they won't go, because they're busy going to the Batei Din, or because they're suspicious of each other, that they're busy going to the Beit Mishpat, to the civil court, or to the Beit Din. Okay.
That's if they let it go that far.
What?
That's if they go to a therapy, once it's gone that far.
Yeah.
If they go to couples therapy, when they still feel there's actually something worth fighting for, they haven't done all that stuff.
They might still do it. They might still do it. It adds fuel to the fire. The legal situation adds fuel to the fire. Tuba.
That, and also, how does, if there's no divorce or get in this case, how does each, either the civil court or the rabbinic court, have jurisdiction? In other words, how could they even accept opening up a file in the example?
Okay, in the civil court, either spouse, without any connection to a divorce, can open a file. For example, let's say a couple lives in Yerushalayim, and the man just takes off and goes to Eilat.
Fine.
And he doesn't, and she wants to fix things with him, right? But the first thing she wants is child support and wife support. He owes her that, right? So she can go to the civil court. She can't go to the Beit Din Rabbani because she's not filing for divorce. So you're right there. In other words, if you go to the Beit Din Rabbani, these cases are piggybacked on a suit for divorce. But in the civil court, they're not connected to a suit for divorce. You can sue for child support or wife support or child custody or even division of assets while being married. It's not going to do it if there aren't grounds for it.
While still maintaining marriage civilly in Israel.
No, they're civilly and religiously married. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned in your example that the woman goes to the civil court and the man goes to the rabbinical court. Is this how it normally plays out? It's been suggested.
Yes, it can be the opposite. It can be the opposite. Each case has its unique features, and you have to consult with a professional to know where whoever you is, the man or the woman, would be better off. I mean, many times the woman is better off in the Beit Din Rabbani. But generally, yes, it can happen. It depends on the case. Generally, that is like the general way to look at it. Yeah. And I'll tell you why. 1 minute, let me tell you why. Because if it's the woman that wants the divorce,
Yeah.
the Batei Din see a woman who is crying. And even if she can't prove that he looks at pornography all day, they can feel that there's no marriage here. There's no marriage here. She really needs the divorce. And they want her to have the divorce. In other words, they feel for her. They want her to have the divorce. But what are they afraid of? They're afraid of a get mu'useh. And a get mu'useh is a coerced divorce. Remember, I said a coerced divorce is invalid. Is invalid when you do it. So they don't want to make more mamzerim, right? So they need to get the guy to agree to get to a divorce, right? And she can't prove that he watches porno all day, even though they feel that she's telling the truth, right? So they cannot give a strict ruling of obligating him to a divorce, or even there is a ruling of fiat get, of course, divorce, but they haven't gotten to that level there yet because she can't prove it. So they want to do everything in their power to get that woman the get. So what do? They use the carrot method instead of the stick. They say to the guy, what's it gonna take for you to give a divorce to your wife? In other words, how much money do you want? Or what do you want? You want the house, the kids, the dog? Tell us, name your price, and then we'll get her to agree, and that way they get him to agree to give a divorce. You follow?
Is that really for the woman though? That would strike me as like...
Yeah.
You're coming from a different angle that they're coming with your two philosophies of life. They're looking at a miskena woman, and the most important thing for this woman is to get her out of that marriage, and so that she can go marry somebody else. And what's money, after all? It's only money. It's only money. What's more important that you should get your get. So let's just give her the money, or very commonly, they'll say, you have 2 children. He should be paying you. I mean, they won't say this, but he should be paying you you have custody of the children. He should be giving you for child support 1,500 shekel for each one of the 2 children. That's 3,000 shekel a month. You know what? I'm going to get him to agree to give you a divorce for 400 shekel for each child. Do you agree? With my own eyes and ears, and this has happened. And he sees a way to get out of paying 1,500 shekel a month for each kid. So he says, all right, for 400 shekel, I'll give her the get. So, but they can't do this. They don't have anything to bargain with if the civil court has the jurisdiction. So they want the jurisdiction on everything, so they'll have with what to bargain. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that the fiat get, though, is still possible. Maybe it's not possible, and it is possible. I mean, it's a little bit confusing.
Okay, fiat get.
Still, there are cases that Muslim.
Okay, Kofinot Hashem Ratzani, that's quoting the Rambam. We don't paskin like the Rambam. Number 1. Number 2, that kofin, any kofinoto that you're going to quote for me from the Gemara and the Rishonim is talking about lashes, whipping him. Okay? All right, so let's say, and there are grounds for, let's say that we would paskin, that we have to do kfiyat get on this man, because he fulfills all the conditions which are long and complicated, that he must give his wife a get. So we're going to coerce him to give a get. Okay, can you picture what would happen? This is again a meeting of the 2 different philosophies of life. I'm just giving you a little promo here, all right? Can you imagine what would happen if behind this desk were sitting 3 venerable rabbanim? What do they look like? They've got black hats, all of them. They've got black hats. They've got black or gray or pepper gray beards and a long back frock, what's called a coat, right? They're sitting there, and the guy is in front of them, and they say, "Anachnu poskim kfiyat get negdecha." You must give your wife a get. Do you agree to give your wife a get? He says, no. He says, okay, we are going to coerce you. And the one that's sitting over here reaches behind his chair, and he pulls out a whip, and he says, okay, here we go. And he starts to whip him, right? What would CNN do with that? All right? We don't do that today. So there is no real kfiyah today.
Sanctions, no?
Excuse me?
Sanctions.
Sanctions. That's not real kfiyah. Real halachic kfiyah is whipping. We
Yeah.
don't whip today, but we have all sorts of types of pressure. So in the state of Israel, as opposed to anywhere else in the world, where the rabbinical courts have no jurisdiction, no power, no nothing whatsoever, it's all voluntary to go to a rabbinical court in the diaspora. Here, because of the civil laws that were passed, the dayanim, the rabbis, have powers that are amazing if you think about it for rabbis to have. They can have litigants arrested and hauled into court. They can have witnesses arrested and hauled into court if they're summoned and they don't come. Right? They can incarcerate someone who refuses to obey their ruling. Before that, they can take away someone who's refusing to give his wife a divorce. They can take away his driver's license, or any professional license like medical, dentistry, electricians, etc. They can close his bank account, to take away his credit cards. They can take away his passport. That goes without saying. They can issue restraining orders against him that he cannot leave the country or cannot go near his home or his wife, etc. He can do all those things. But many people, remember I told you about that process of from pain to anger to rage to vindictiveness to self-destruction? People who go down that slippery slope, I've seen people that have lost their jobs, don't drive a car, they're living off of Bituach Leumi, and they're bumming off friends to where to sleep, and they don't care. And I've seen, and they're just refusing to give their wife a get, completely unrealistically. And then I myself have put men into jail for refusing to give their wives a get, and they live in jail. It's like a day camp with a lock on it. Okay, especially if they're Orthodox, if they're religious, because then they're in the Machlaka Torani. And there they have minyan 3 times a day, and they've got shiurim on the grass in the sun. I've seen it with my own eyes. And on the sun, and the ones that are smart and that went to yeshivot hesder, they become like the rabbi of the place, and the wardens think very highly of them because they're big Talmidei Chachamim. And the wardens many times are traditional Jews, and so they respect an ish Torah, and they get 3 square, very nutritious meals a day. And they get the laundry done. They don't have TV if they're in the Machlaka Toranit. But otherwise, they can play cards, play shesh. Yeah.
Well, why, if a man was thrown into jail and then gave the get, why would that not be called a get and it was set?
Because if it was done in accordance with the halacha is complicated. I can't teach you the halacha in 45 minutes, right? There are conditions under which you can get more and more stringent rulings against the man. So, for example, social sanctions. In halacha, it's called Hakakot to Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam said, who was the grandson of Rashi, right? He said that you cannot coerce today, meaning in the 1100s. He said, today we cannot coerce anymore. Coercion is out the window. We cannot coerce. Then, okay, we're 1,000 years almost behind after that. But he said what we can do is that we can't even put him in cherem. But what we can do, because that's also coercion, what we can do is put the community in cherem. What does that mean? We can instruct the community, you may not have anything to do with him. You may not sell him pizza. You may not do a brit milah to his son. You may not bury him in a cemetery, in a Jewish cemetery. You may not call him up for an aliyah l'Torah. You may not give him any kavod, any kibbutz. Don't talk to him. And certainly don't invite him over for Friday night dinner because Miskin, he's all alone, a man alone, and now he's going to make himself Friday night dinner. Absolutely not. That's all part of the social sanctions called Hakakot de Rabbeinu Tam. And that can be applied when the Dayanim say that they can be applied. Okay. All right. Last question before we move on.
Because you kept saying that the woman can't prove that that you have to porn all day, but but if she comes in with scars and things like that, also there are ways to prove that.
You can try to prove it. There are some Batei Din that will will accept as proof police reports and photographs from a hospital or a hospital report. I personally was once representing a woman that we brought in, he had attacked her father. In other words, he was violent in general to her, and at one point he attacked her father, and they had taken, he was hospitalized, and they took pictures of the father in the hospital, and he had to be hospitalized. It was serious, right? And I presented this to the Dayanim in Petach Tikva, and they said to me, who said that he did it? Doesn't say here that he did it. Maybe somebody else beat the father up. Okay, so it's very difficult. It's an extremely difficult situation.
Could prove it. What happens then in terms of that?
Then they might obligate him to divorce. And then if he says no, but you know what the bottom line is? The bottom line is that the husbands, even if he's not religious, even if he's not educated, every husband that enters into a divorce process in the state of Israel finds out very quickly, if he never thought about it beforehand, and he knows that he has more power than the Dayanim. The Dayanim can stand on their heads and whistle Dixie and put him into jail, which doesn't happen the first day. It takes years till they put him into jail. And he ultimately has more power. He has the power over the Dayanim. He has the power over the Dayanim because he is the only one in the world that has the power to give the get. The Dayanim don't have the power to change their personal status. And it's an enormous Chol Hashem. In other words, I've handled cases where the guy laughed at the Rav Rashi in his face. He laughed at him. And the Rav Rashi couldn't do anything. So the court knows that he has more power than they do, and he knows that he has more power than they do. So you enter into this terrible situation that they're, in the first place, bargaining with him to see what will appease him. It's a policy of appeasement. That's what they resort to. In order to get the get as quickly as possible, they resort to a policy of appeasement. But it's not working anymore, because once you appease in one factor, then all of a sudden there are more and more demands, and the demands become very unrealistic. I mean, unrealistic in fact that they're not legal anymore.
Such as?
If someone hasn't paid child support for a year or 2 or 3 or 4, the woman can go to Bituach Leumi and ask Bituach Leumi to support her children, and she gets money from Bituach Leumi, and then the man owes the money not to the wife, or the children, he owes the money to Bituach Leumi. Okay? So there was Erev Pesach, a Talmud of, I'm not going to say in order not to embarrass, 2 yeshivotes there. He went to 2 different yeshivotes there. He was brilliant. He spent all his time in Ramleh, in the jail in Ramleh, thinking and writing up these handwritten court papers all the time. He notified Erev Pesach that he's willing to give a get. I'm talking about the day before the night of B'dikat Chametz. Nobody works then, right? So everybody came to the Beit Din. The Rav Rashi, who was the Beit Din of Rabbanei Gadol, the Supreme Rabbinic Court. The Rav Rashi was there. Another 2 Dayanim, the Sofrim, the clerks, me representing the woman. Okay, everybody comes. Erev Pesach, literally. And the Rav Rashi says, "Are you willing to give a get?" I mean, they had gone through lots of bargaining sessions. Taking down the child support to 300 shekel, whatever it is, right? And he says, "Yes, I want to give the get, but I just have one condition." And he goes up to the Rav Rashi and he hands him this folded up piece of paper, lined paper, and he opens it up to Rav Rashi. 31 clauses. 31 clauses. And the Rav Rashi looks at this and he starts reading the first clause. What's the first clause? That the criminal case against him for beating his children which was in criminal court, right, should be thrown out. It should be nullified. Should be nullified. And the woman should say that. The woman should cancel that case. Okay, that doesn't work. It's not legal. Once a criminal case has been opened against somebody for abuse within the family, it's out of the hands of the family members. It's only in the hands of the police and the attorneys, the district attorney's office. She has no power to say nullify it. So the Rav Rashi explains to him. He says, I'm the Rav Rashi. I cannot nullify that case. It's just not legal. It's not done. And he says, yes, it can be done. You don't know. It can be done. So the Rav Rashi says to him, I can bring the Yoetz HaMishpati LeMemshala, the attorney of the government. Now, Erev Pesach, I can bring him to this courtroom, and he will tell you that he cannot do it. And the guy says, yes, he can. And so the Rav Rashi didn't continue reading the other 30 clauses, because the first one it was impossible. So the Rav Rashi looked at me. I was at that point working in the Hanalat Batei Adin, and we had just passed the law that the Rabbanim can send him to solitary confinement. So he was going to rule. He was already in prison. This guy. This was going on for years. In others, I only got the case when it was going on for 11 years. All right. So and then it took me about another 3.5 years to get the get. But so I said to the Rav Rashi, I will make sure that if you rule that he has to go to solitary confinement, and he was a dati guy, I said I will get him make sure that he's in solitary confinement for Leila Seder. For Leila Seder. And this is the case where the guy laughed in the Rav Rashi's face. He said, you can't put me in solitary confinement. You certainly can't put me in solitary confinement for Leila Seder. He laughed, literally laughed, a rolling laugh. And indeed, I had him sent. I made arrangements with the prison, and he was the first get-refuser who was put into solitary confinement. And he was put into solitary confinement for over Pesach. In other words, from before Leila Seder, he went straight to solitary confinement from over Leila Seder till after Pesach, but it still didn't help at that point. Okay, you asked about the ketubah. I just want to relate to that very briefly. The ketubah is almost never paid in the state of Israel. It's never ruled that a man has to pay his wife a ketubah, because at the moment that a woman agrees to a get, the ketubah is not paid. Once the divorce, then he doesn't have to pay her. He's not the one throwing her out.
Right. But the opposite case, why wouldn't he get it? If he's the one who wants to get the divorce, and she still has to give him a get, right? So she has some bargaining power.
It's very rare that it can happen. Very rare. In the space of a year, like a legal year, it may happen in less than 5 cases. And there are 9,000 cases a year of divorce. Okay? So it's extremely rare.
Why?
Because of the way the halakha is built. I don't want to go into it now, but that's the principle behind it. Okay? I want to get into prenups now. Yeah.
So I have to ask you, you sort of took you an extra 3 years to get this guy to give a get.
Yes.
How did you do it?
How did I do it?
Sorry, what was the question?
How did this guy, I called him my Rosh Yeshiva in jail. Okay, in other words, the first time I met him, I showed up
At the 11th year.
At the 11th year. The first time I met him, I came to the court with the Beit Din, with the woman, and there were 3 Roshei Yeshiva there. 3 Roshei Yeshiva who came to the Beit Din, who wanted to tell him to give his wife a get in front of the Beit Din. And they were talking to him. And then the Beit Din says to him, aren't you embarrassed? Don't you want to obey what your Rosh Yeshiva say to you? He says, no, they don't know. I know better. Okay. How? I'll tell you how. This was going on for years in the Supreme Rabbinic Court, the Beit Din Rabbani Gadol, in the High Rabbinic Court. And the Rav Rashi retired. The Rav Rashi retired, that same Rav Rashi that had the 31 clauses there. He retired, so a new judge was assigned to it. And the new judge wanted to learn the case. And so he did something very smart. He called in everybody, with asking permission of everybody, to speak to them individually. The guy, the wife, and me, without the wife. In other words, I was helping the wife, to speak to them privately, without anybody else around. And I gave him an idea, which was very smart. And I gave him an idea, and he ran with the idea. It worked. I said to him, look, one of the there were like 3 main clauses conditions that this guy wants. He wants that Bituach Leumi, remember I explained about Bituach Leumi? And this is done standard. This is standard. You and I, taxpayers, are paying money to these guys. Okay? He wants Bituach Leumi to forgive the 400,000 shekel that he owed Bituach Leumi. Okay? And we got it done in order for him to give his wife a get. And then he wanted something else. I can't remember what it was. By that time he had been sentenced in the violence against the kids case. Yes, he wanted the Beit Din to write a recommendation that he should get off a third for good behavior. So if he gives a get, the Beit Din will write this is also common practice, the Beit Din will write a recommendation for his sentence, the criminal sentence, not for the sentence for being in jail for not giving a get. So that was the second thing. That was like, by that time we had gotten him down to 3 things, not 31, all right? And the last one was that he wanted a visitation with his children. Now, he hadn't seen his children in about 13 years, all right? 2 kids. So they were teenagers by now, right? And all they remember of their father is that he used to hit them. So he wanted free and clear visitation without the kids. Without anybody around him, right? And now that's not possible. So I said to the Dayan, I said the only way that I can think, we've tried everything. I told him we've tried everything. So I think that what we can do is that we can. I said, in order to understand, it was a combination. I said, in order to really understand what makes this guy tick, in other words, I knew him very well by then, we really need to get him to talk to a psychologist so that a psychologist can help us. So I said, I want to combine 2 things at the same time. I want you to tell him, I'm suggesting that you tell him that if he wants to see the children, we will have him see the children, but only after a psychologist speaks with everybody involved. Speaks with the mother, speaks with the father, speaks with the children. And then a court-appointed psychologist, and then the psychologist will give his recommendation to the Beit Din, and after the get, he'll see that the psychologist gives him, the recommendation will stay sealed until after the get, and then after the get, the Dayan will open it up, and then he will issue his ruling. Okay? The Dayan went with it. And it was not easy for the wife, because she lived in the south of the country. And this guy, obviously, he did his homework, and he said, I only want 1 psychologist. And thank God it was the same psychologist that I wanted. All right? Thank God it was the same one. He was a Dati person who lived in the center of the country, who had a lot of experience in Get-Refusal cases. He worked for the Beit Din. So somebody had given him that guy's name, and he said, that's the one I want. So we agreed. That was the one I want. And it was very difficult because the woman was very poor, and she had to bring her children a couple of times to the center of the country to be interviewed by the psychologist, which wasn't pleasant for them and cost them a couple hundred shekel back and forth. And but what did it do? The psychologist went and spoke to him in jail a few times. Okay, so then he wrote up his recommendation. We got Bituach Leumi to cancel the debt. The Dayan promised to write the recommendation to take a third off of his criminal sentence, and lo and behold, we did the get. And then afterwards, when he ruled about the kids, the judge, I don't even remember. It was irrelevant because the kids were 16 and 14 or something. So whatever you rule about the kids, but at least he had the hope that he would get visitation, and that's what finally made him give the get. Okay, now.
How many years is he in jail?
4.
Rachel,
Okay, running away. Okay.
Run through it.
You should all be signing, you and all your friends and all your relatives and any Jew in the world who gets married under Orthodox auspices should be signing prenuptial agreements for 3 basic reasons. The first is tikkun olam. This is a terrible blight on Jewish society, and if you sign, then your cousin will sign, and his next door neighbor will sign, and her best friend will sign, and everybody will be covered. Because, as I said, we cannot erase the divorce statistics. There will be 30% or more divorces in Israel, and there's more in the United States. But we can make them dignified, quiet, respectful divorces to minimize the trauma, to minimize the collateral damage. Everybody hurts when they get a divorce, but we don't need the collateral damage all around, which we discussed. So if you take it upon yourselves to be sure that everyone you know signs a prenuptial agreement, you will be doing a tikkun olam in the very society in which you live, and in which eventually you'll be bringing up your children who will marry children of divorced people. Even if you yourself are not going to get divorced. You have to have that effect on Jewish society. The second reason is personal insurance. Just like when you buy a new car, and you get into your shiny silver car, and you want to go show it to your friends, you put the key in the ignition. Before you turn it on, what's the first thing you do? You go like this. You put on your seatbelt. Why? Because you know that accidents can happen. If you knew that there was going to be an accident, you weren't to go drive to your friends. But you know that accidents can happen and it's not in your control. So why are you putting on your seatbelt? Because you want to minimize the collateral damage. So the same thing goes with a prenuptial agreement. You're not going to get divorced. However, if God forbid you happen to fall into that statistic of divorcing, you want to minimize the collateral damage, and you want to make sure that now, at the height of love between you and your future spouse, you want to set the rules of how you're going to split up if you need to split up. Because if you try to set the rules later, that doesn't work. You set the rules now that there's going to be a quiet, dignified divorce. And what you're saying is absolutely the most romantic thing you can say to a partner. You're saying, I love you so much that for the rest of my life, whether you're the man or the woman, for the rest of your life, of our lives, for the rest of our lives, I want to protect you from any harm that may befall you. Any harm that may befall you. That comes together with marriage, right? But I love you so much that I even want to protect you from myself. Nothing can be more romantic than that. The third reason you should be signing a prenuptial agreement is that you are making halachic history by doing that. You are helping, you're taking part in a historic development of the halacha to address a need of Am Yisrael. And that opportunity comes only once in a lifetime. Just when you get married. And I can't do it. I'm married already. Okay? You have to do it. You have to do it, and you will have the zchut to take part in a historic development of the halacha in a halachic manner. Now, I just want to tell you that on your English language, it says selections for the Agreement for Mutual Respect. Can you please write down this web address? It's got the wrong web address on it. Okay? The Hebrew version has the correct web address. Please copy down the International Young Israel Movement's web address, and you click onto prenuptial there. There's a lot of information there, both in Hebrew and English. You must scroll down the page. Now, since this is an English-speaking group, even if it wasn't an English-speaking group, I'd tell it to everybody, but all the more so since you're an English-speaking group, I want to explain that there are on the webpage, there are two versions of the Hesken Lekavot Hadadi. The standard version, which was developed by Rav Eliashiv Knoll, the Rav of Kibbutz Kfar Etzion, Rav Doctor now, David Ben Zazon, who was at the time the Rav of Kibbutz Ein Tzurim, and they were both Rabbanim in Yeshivat Kibbutz Hadati in Ein Tzurim, and myself as a Toanet Rabbanit. So that's the Hesken Lekavot Hadadi. However, through the Young Israel and with in conjunction with the Beth Din of America, which is the Beit Din of the OU and the RCA and of YU, right? We added an additional clause. In English, it's clause R. In Hebrew, it's clause Yud Chet. It's an international clause, meaning you should sign the version with the international clause. If you scroll down the webpage, you will find it, because if it's a small global community, you go do a postdoc in the United States, or you go there for work or family. If chas v'shalom, there's a crisis and you're in Europe or the United States, this clause has the Beth Din of America's prenup kick in as the agreement to be used in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, that's it.
So even in countries where it's not accepted yet? I mean, like England, for instance, they haven't yet.
England has crazy laws. There, you can look up, if you Google, either call me or Google, get an English law. There's an article on jlaw.com that I'm one of the authors. We developed a special prenuptial agreement based on the Agreement for Mutual Respect in keeping with British law. So you signed that one. So you signed that one. If somebody has an affinity for England, one of the couple, then you sign that one as an addition. Yeah, but call me. All right.
I have a friend who is very much for this whole, prenuptial agreement. And when she got engaged, they had a discussion about it. And he had never heard about it. He was actually about tshuva and whatever. And it caused a lot of fights. And she said that the wording was actually very difficult. When you're engaged and you're talking about marriage, to go read through it and the wording. And his parents were telling him, you don't want to sign that, it's not for your benefit. And in the end, it was too much of a fight and she gave up on it. And they never signed it.
Okay, I'm
I'm
going to address that with 2 points. First of all, if you took all the papers from outside, the Hebrew language article, which is 3 pages long, gives practical guidance on how to bring up the subject. Okay? It tells you what words to use even, how to bring up the subject when it's difficult to bring up the subject if someone is not aware of it. That's number 1. Number 2, you're 100% right. The wording it's very wordy. It's very wordy because it's also legally valid and halachically valid. And for it to be sewn up tight, it's watertight. It has worked. This agreement has saved women already. It's watertight because it's a legal contract, and this was not developed in 2 months. This took a few years to develop, and it's proven itself that it works. Now, how do you sign it? You sign it either in front of the Rasham Nisuin, that's one man. The Rasham Nitzuim in the Moatzah Datit where you register for marriage, or in front of basically in front of 2 places, either the Rasham Nitzuim or in front of a notary public. In front of a notary. Not every lawyer is a notary, but every notary is a lawyer. You have to find a notary in front of a notary. If you sign the international version, which I recommend to every couple I speak with, then you sign it in front of a notary. Okay? And you sign 3 copies. You're all welcome to call me when there's a simcha coming. Okay, I like that.
You haven't addressed the problem. In other words, maybe there should be people who sit with couples.
I do.
And
I do. You can call me. I'll sit with you. I do. Okay, yeah.
I have 2 questions. First of all, is there any possibility, because you mentioned that you can't sign this because you're married already, is there any possibility of making a post-nup? Right.
Okay, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I have a post-nup version in my computer. It's a little bit more complicated because if they're married already, then they also have gone through a period of time, depending on how long that they're married, that they have gathered assets under the marriage, the period of marriage. So that's one sticky problem, but that can be handled easily, relatively easily. And secondly, you cannot sign it in front of the marriage registrar or in front of a notary. If you're, by law, in the state of Israel, any agreement made between a husband and a wife is not legally valid unless it's in writing and it was signed in front of either the civil family court or the Beit Din Rabbani. So you have to go to the civil family court with it. So that's a little bit of a pain in the neck, and people don't like to go to court.
I the second question is, if the Batei Din are on board with this concept, is there any way?
No, they're not.
They're not. I'm saying if
some are, some aren't.
Okay, so then let me rephrase it then. If in theory they were on board with the concept, would there be any way of making that part of the marriage process legally? That if they're going to marry people off, and they would either force them or give them some kind of an incentive.
Okay. The answer is yes, but people don't get to the Beit Din at the point of marriage. People get to the Beit Din at the point of divorce. The people they get to at the point of marriage are the rabbis in the Moetzah Datit.
So
the marriage
part of them. I'm saying, is there any way to make it part of?
Yes and no. Theoretically, yes. There is now Tzipi Livni is pushing a proposed bill to make it standard that you must sign a prenuptial agreement before you get married, and there is a committee with which I am working in the Ministry of Religion to try to find an agreement that everybody will agree to, and I think you will agree with me that it's impossible to find an agreement that all rabbis and all Jews.
Well, if Tzipi Livni is working on it, you definitely have the right person.
No, she's not working on it. She made a proposed agreement, and the Ministry of Religion, that's Eli Ben-Dahan, who is for this agreement specifically. Eli Ben-Dahan approves and is willing to promote this agreement, but this agreement is too long. Remember I said it's watertight? It's too long to give as a standard to every person because the clerks in the Moetzah Datiyot will have no idea how to explain it to them. All right? And there's also a danger that the clerks in the Moetzah so they're working on it, and it's going to take forever. All right? That's going to take forever. But also, if you were to do that and set in place a method that the clerks in the Moetzah Datit must recommend that you sign a prenuptial agreement, they're going to give prenuptial agreements which are not something that you would want to sign. Okay, that would say that we give complete jurisdiction to the Beit Din to talk about all our issues at the time of a divorce. And you wouldn't want to sign it. I don't think any of the people in this room would want to sign it because you cannot predict what a Rav in a Dayan will paskin in the Beit Din. You can't predict what a judge in a civil court will rule because he will rule in accordance with the law. So you know what you're getting into. So the clerks are of a different age. Let's put it that way. So you can't work with them. However, the rabbinic organization of Beit Hillel has come out as a matter of policy that people should be signing prenuptial agreements, and specifically Haskem Kavod Hadadi, this agreement. And Irgun Tzohar, that does about 8,000 registration of marriages a year, they're about to embark on a big campaign. I am working with them on a big campaign explaining that all couples should sign a prenuptial agreement, and they are towards the end of the process of putting together a prenuptial agreement that is shorter than this, totally based on this, on the Haskem L'Kavod Hadadi. In my opinion, it's not as watertight. And they put in a few things that I don't approve of. So I wouldn't have any of my kids, male or female, sign that one. I would tell them to sign this one. This one.
Like what?
That you give the power to an arbiter to decide whether to. It's an optional clause to decide whether this agreement kicks in or not. In other words, whether it's proper to have a divorce. So you're just moving the job of convincing the Beit Din to convincing the borer. And then you're going to end up having to convince both the borer, the arbiter, and the Beit Din afterwards. But I've watered down the damage that they originally started off with. It's taken a lot of cost from me in the past year. And I've got them to agree as best as I can get out of them, all right? But it's certainly better than nothing. Just don't opt in for any of the clauses that they want you to opt in for, all right? And so they're going to be giving it to every couple that registers. That's 8,000 couples. All right, so that, again, answers your question. The change came about, I knew that this would happen, the change came about because of two reasons. We, in America and in Morocco in the 50s, prenuptial agreements came from the rabbis. It was the rabbis that saw the need, and they drew it up. Here, the rabbis didn't see the need because they have jurisdiction. They figure, oh, we can convince everybody to give the get. Even, they were like, in a state of denial. They still are, somewhat. Any Dayan you talk to, he says, it's li and Agunot b'herkev sheli. And I've spoken to many Dayanim. And they all say the same thing. No Agunot in my courtroom. So whose courtroom are they? Right? Okay, so in any case, here it was from the grassroots. The grassroots, it spread in the grassroots. It went up to mid-level rabbis, meaning your community rabbis, your Rosh Yeshiva. And now, because of the pressure, and then at the same time in 2009, I published my book. And my book is a Sefer Halacha. It's not anything else. It's a Sefer Halacha, and it addresses, in the language that the Rabbanim speak, it addresses the whole issue, and it teaches them what's involved, and it goes through 16 different prenups that were signed in the state of Israel and shows what's wrong with each of them until you get to the Eskem L'Kavod Hadadi, which solves all the problems. It does. It solves all the halachic problems, it solves all the technical problems, it solves all the problems. And this was given out to all the Dayanim. It was given out to all the judges in the Civil Family Court, all the judges in the Supreme Court. It was given out to 1,000 Rabbanim in the state of Israel in 2009. And now we're reaping the results of them finally reading it and taking it seriously. In other words, so all these committee meetings that Dayanim and Rabbanim are coming to, you see them walking in with my book in their hand, with bookmarked and highlighted and things like that. It's working. I knew it would take time.
Just one more question.
Yeah,
we
go
got
ahead.
over majorly. Sorry.
I just wanted to know if these are all the problems with the system, with the religious system. Why would anybody like me sort of observant but not so free that
A multitude of reasons.
why
A multitude of
why-
reasons. The first one is that you want to be registered as married. Legally. You want to be legally registered as married. So in order to do that in the state of Israel, you have to go through the Rabbanut. Okay, but you're autonomous and you're an intelligent person, so you're going to protect yourself with the prenup. That's what you're going to do. Okay, thank you very much.
But what I'd like to talk about this evening is really about what are the 10 key areas where couples often will get stuck, or individuals will get stuck in terms of not choosing a partner, but being with a partner. So there are 10 things that I have found from working with couples and individuals that if a person understands more about themselves and learns more about these key things, they will have a greater likelihood of being successful. And I cannot tell you how many couples I've worked with who've said they wished they knew all this stuff before they got married. If only they knew this, that, and the other before they got married. If only there was a place where they can go to learn all these sorts of things. And the truth is, there's a tremendous amount of research. I mean, there's been research for at least the last 25 years alone that shows the 10 key areas where couples will often get stuck, and the areas where couples need to beef up their skills a little bit. And most people do not avail themselves of this information. I'm not going to just strictly stay with those 10 things. And by the way, where you can find that information is from the Prepare and Rich website, which was created by Dr. David Olson 25 years ago. He created a program called the Prepare and Rich program, and he's actually even creating a parenting program now, I just discovered. And he helps couples who are dating, who are engaged, who are married already, and he identifies exactly where the couple is getting stuck, and he gives you tools and skills to work on with the therapist, so that you can work through that stuff. But obviously, he recommends that people go to do his program as early as possible. I'm going to veer off a little bit from what Dr. David Olson does and talk about some of the things that I've come across with the couples that I've worked with. So the 10 key things that I've come up with that I think would be very, very useful for people to be aware of and to work on before they find their partner are as follows. So I'm just going to whip through them, and then I'll go through them a little bit more in depth. So the first one is to create your own sense of security, to know how to do that, to celebrate what it is that makes you feel self-reliant, to work on your sense of flexibility, to create individual space for yourself, and for your partner, even though they don't exist yet, and to see where you can create space where you and your partner would overlap. You don't have to write this down, I'm going to give you a sheet at the end. To make sure your life feels balanced with the essential things. To create a list of resources that you bring to a marriage. To be open to suggestions and not overly uptight about criticism. And to know what it is that makes you feel respected. And make sure you know how to respect your partner in a similar type of manner. To create good boundaries for yourself that have some fluidity so that you can remain intact. And to know how to say I'm sorry, to know how to apologize, and to also how to receive an apology, even when you don't feel that you were wrong. Okay, so these are the 10 key areas that I found. I know some of you are looking at me like, wow, that's quite a lot of stuff. And the truth is, it is a lot of stuff. And some of you might actually listen to this speech and think, wow, that just sounds kind of obvious. And others of you might think, well, there's some things here where I actually might be struggling. So hopefully each of you will, take this at whatever level you need to take it. Okay, so I'd like to just start off for a moment, just to have you just think for yourselves. I'm not going to ask you to share this with anybody, but just think for yourselves, what is it that makes you feel secure? What are some of the things that you feel, you don't have to share this, if you would like to, you can, but what are some of the things, just think for yourself, or talk with the person you're sitting next to help you, think for yourself what it is that makes you feel secure. I'll give you just a few moments to think about that.
Can you pass out the sheets now and post that in?
Yeah, I suppose I can do that. I don't need to get too hard and fast enough, but okay. Sure. All right, everybody have their ideas in mind. Anybody like to share? You don't have to. Oh, yeah, Al, thank you.
I feel secure when I'm around people with good boundaries, who I trust, and who I know understand me and have tolerance for my moods or whatever.
Great. Excellent. I thought of that one too. Good. Anybody else? Can anybody think of something that would make them feel secure going into a relationship or being in a relationship? If you don't want to share, you don't have to, but... Okay.
I think the same way.
Yes?
You think the same way with talking to either the guy and feel comfortable.
Something that they do to help you feel comfortable and safe to share what you want to say?
Yeah, like...
Okay. That's a good one. That's a good one. Thank you. Yeah.
Being with someone who has the same values.
Similar values?
Similar values, okay.
Okay. Yep. That would be good. That's a good one. Actually, I hadn't thought of that one, but that's a good one. Yeah?
Someone is communicative.
Communicative.
And tolerant.
Tolerance. Very good. Excellent. Okay, so some of the things that I come up with are some of the things that you said. I'll just kind of whip through them. So some of the things that I think help a person to feel secure, and these are not things that everybody would think of. Someone who shows that they understand when I'm having a difficult time. Someone who can handle my difficult feelings. I think a few of you said that. Someone who shows compassion for myself and for other people. Maybe someone who doesn't act out their feelings of anger too easily. What I mean by acting out anger, doesn't mean that they don't express anger, but they don't act out their anger, they don't throw things, they're not violent and things like that. And there's a big difference between those two things. Someone who doesn't shut down when their feelings get too difficult. This is something that I see time and time again, where a couple of things that they're actually fighting, they're arguing, and actually they're not fighting at all. One's going to this room, one's going to that room. There's actually not been any argument, and they can't actually move forward in whatever discussion that they're having because they just feel so they can't even express how they're really feeling. Someone who does, and the other thing is someone who can't tolerate challenges, right? Someone who can't tolerate things like when a mini crisis or even a big crisis arises, and that's the sort of thing that just happens in real life. We all hope that we won't have a crisis, but stuff does happen, and we have to be able to really be able to step up and deal with that sort of stuff. So these are the sorts of things that we need to be aware of, because these are things we need to really have conversations about, and these are things we can actually talk about even before we decide to marry the partner. I'm not saying you'd be checking this out on a first date or even a second date, but as the relationship progresses, these are the sorts of things that if you have them in the back of your mind, you can actually start having some conversations with your partner about seeing and testing out how they, not actually real life testing, but you can sort of road test some of these things in terms of how do you think you would deal with X, Y, and Z. Okay, so the other thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is that we actually cannot rely on our partners for our sense of security. We actually need to create our own sense of security for ourselves. And this is a big mistake that so many people make. They just don't want to take responsibility for their own security. They just want to say, no, when I get married, then I will feel secure. And that's a huge mistake that so many of us really do make. And they don't, and there's actually good reasons for why people make these mistakes, and people haven't been taught that their sense of security actually lies within themselves. This is actually something we need to be taught from our parents or from somewhere in society. We need to be taught that we actually have to take responsibility for ourselves. Yes?
I don't understand, because we've just written down being around somebody who's X, Y, and Z makes me feel secure. So how's
Right.
that inside myself?
Right, but okay, that's a very good question, because when we actually can do this for ourselves, we're actually communicating, even not verbally, we're actually communicating, this is how I want to be treated. But we have to actually expect this from ourselves first, before we can expect this from our partner. If we can't create a sense of security within ourselves, we cannot demand it from our partners.
I mean, expect myself to be compassionate towards myself, put up with my own feelings, do all the behaviours which I
And
want.
towards him as well.
Right, okay.
Exactly. But we have to first be able to do this for ourselves before we even can expect it from somebody else. In other words, if we can't tolerate our own feelings, to expect our partners to be able to tolerate our feelings is not fair. We have to be able to first tolerate our own difficult stuff, and then we can have that expectation on somebody else. And then we can also do it the way that we can discuss it with our partner. We can do it in a calm way rather than a demanding, naggy, icky sort of way, which is often what happens with so many couples that I've seen. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that. Oh, also the other thing is very often people confuse some of the things we talked about in terms of security with other things. Very often people will say, well, what I really need, I'm glad nobody did say this here, is that they need someone who's going to be really financially secure. And I'm not saying you shouldn't choose someone who's going to have a decent job, but some people really, and I've come across this in the work that I do as well, where men I've worked with have been dumped because they weren't earning enough money. And they had perfectly decent, viable jobs, but some of them, and this happens both ways, where, it's not that the person's not earning enough money, they don't have a stable job, they do have a stable job, but this person, their person they were dating, obviously felt they should be earning oodles of money for them to feel secure. And yes, I'm not going to poo-poo it and say that financial security isn't an important thing. We have to really we have to put that into proportion, and also not also think, hafuch, that, oh, well, I'm going to marry this really rich person and then I'll feel secure. I mean, because if that were the case, then Kim Kardashian would have had to get married 50,000 times to half of America, right? Financial security is not something that really makes us feel secure, and even more so, it often gives us a full sense of security if we just rely on that alone. Sorry.
When you talk about financial security, isn't it sensible for a woman to put a little bit of thought into that kind of thing?
And I did say that, yes. I do agree, but we have to put it in proportion, right? Okay. You don't have to expect the person to be earning, millions of shekels a year. $500,000 should be okay. I'm just joking. Whatever, we have to understand what normal income is for society at large. Sure. I really didn't mean that tongue in cheek. I hope you all understand that. Okay. Okay. So I'd just like to explain a little bit about where security does come from in terms of creating a relationship. And there are people out there who, believe it or not, who would swear up and down that they want to have a relationship with a partner, and they are incapable of doing so unless they understand certain things about themselves and their relationship with their parents. And what I'm talking about now is called attachment theory. Is anybody here familiar with attachment theory? Yeah? Great. Okay, a few of you. Pardon? No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about imago too. Very good. I'm not talking about imago, I'm talking about attachment theory. Attachment theory is something that was created in, it's a theory that was developed by John Bowlby in the 1950s and 60s. And basically, he developed his theory based on the work that he was doing as a psychologist, and he was visiting young children in hospitals. And he was seeing how young children in hospitals that had been left for extended periods of time without seeing their parents, how each of them would respond to their parents if they had seen them on a daily basis versus those who had not seen their parents on a daily basis. And what he discovered was, and this is something that a lot of research has been done after this as well, and you'll see this a lot in terms of children who are in ganim, in creche, in kindergarten, whatever, in terms of how they leave their parents. So there's 3 different types of attachment that John Bowlby came across. There's the secure attachment. I'll go through each one. The secure attachment, that's on one side of the spectrum. There's the ambivalent attachment on the other side of the spectrum, and then there's something called enmeshed attachment, which is smack bang in the middle. Now, a secure attachment is one where you sort of have a pretty fluid relationship with your parent. You know that your parents are going to provide your basic needs for you, so you're going to have a sense of security with you whether your parent is in your presence or not. You're going to have this belief that your parent will come back for you eventually, especially if you're a young child. You might cry a little bit because you're like a little sad that they're going to leave, but you're not going to be like, oh my God, my world has just come crashing down. A child who has an ambivalent attachment is one who doesn't have any sense of security whatsoever. They don't have any belief that their parent really has their core vested interest at heart. And if their parent comes or goes, it's kind of irrelevant to them because they really don't have any sense of trust in them or anybody else in the world. And that's what a person is going to be really struggling to develop a relationship.
Isn't that called avoidance?
Ambivalent or avoidant. There's two different names for it. There's a few different people. People have different names. But you're right. It's either avoidant or ambivalent. It's the same. We're talking about the same thing now. Okay. You're right. And basically, that's what a person, as much as they would say that they want to be in a relationship, if they haven't worked through their attachment issues with their parents, and I'm not saying with their parents, but in some sort of therapeutic way, they're going to really struggle to get into a relationship. And there's a lot of people who go for those sorts of people because there's some sort of excitement and raciness in being with those people because they're kind of jumping in and out of relationships all the time. And it's a really challenging situation. Then you've got the enmeshed attachment. Now that's a person who doesn't know whether they're coming or going. In terms of, sometimes their parents had such a strong attachment with them, they almost didn't know, the child doesn't even know where they stop and start. They're like, it's as if their umbilical cord has not been cut. And I've seen this a lot with people who struggle to move out of home or who really are over-reliant on their parents for things that you shouldn't be, past a certain age, like, once you're already, like, say, in your 20s or 30s. It would also show up where also sometimes the child feels this tremendous amount of guilt in living a separate life to their parents in some sort of way. And that's a very, very challenging thing where that person would also have a very difficult time getting into a relationship because they haven't cut off the umbilical cord from their parents. They can't really enter into another relationship. These are some of the things that we need to really be aware of in terms of creating our own secure base, because those are the sorts of things. Our relationship with our parents is going to be the thing that's going to shape the kind of the way that we feel secure about ourselves, the way that we are in this world, and the way that we can go and connect with somebody else. The other thing that Rennie, thank you, just blanking there for a moment, mentioned is something called imago theory, which I'm sure a lot of people heard of it. There was a lot of stuff, a lot of noise made about it in the 80s. Oprah Winfrey loved to talk about Harville Hendrix' imago theory. She had him on her show like a billion times. And basically, imago theory is a bit of an extension of attachment theory because he looks at how different people related to their parents, but kind of later in life. And what he basically says is that, and I'm really saying all these things in a nutshell, and there are reams and reams of books written about all these different types of things, but different types of the way that your relationship is with your parents, and it's not every aspect of the relationship, but there might be some challenging aspects of your relationship with your parents, that could have a spillover effect between you and your partner, or it could impact on how you're going to relate to your partner if it isn't something that's been dealt with. And very often, people will even know that they had a challenging experience with their parent. They know that they've been yelled at or not been trusted, or all sorts of different issues will come up between a parent and a child. And that sort of thing, if a child hasn't worked through that stuff themselves, they're going to bring that into a relationship, and that's going to create all sorts of trust issues, all sorts of beliefs about how you're meant to have relationships, and it can cause a lot of challenges. And Harville Hendrix actually wrote 2 books. First, he wrote a book called Getting the Love You Want, Giving the Love You Need, something to that effect. But it was more of a book written for couples who are already married. And then he said, you know what? Why should people wait to be married to have to deal with this stuff? They should think about this well before they got married. He wrote another book for singles, something along those lines. Pardon?
Keeping the Love You Find.
The second one was Getting the Love You Want, Keeping the Love You Find. And then the first one was called, I can't remember what it was called, but there was a book that it's much more Getting Love in the First Place, something like that. Finding Love in the First Place, or something like that, or Getting Love Right, or something to that effect. But there is a book out there that's very much geared towards people who are not yet in a relationship, and something I highly recommend people do have a look at. So this is kind of just like a backdrop to the whole security thing, and I can't really speak enough about it, but I'm gonna have to cut that back. But the bottom line is that the more that we can actually be aware of what it is that makes us feel secure, the more that we can give ourselves that sense of security, the more that we can go into a relationship and not put all of our expectations on our partner. Because that is something that puts such a tremendous amount of pressure on the relationship. When we put expectations on our partner that we can't put on top of ourselves, that's something that puts so much pressure on the relationship just cannot survive properly. So something to really be aware of.
Are you connecting this to attachment theory? Like we have to figure out which one are we, and according to this, react to our partner? Or?
Work on it. If we don't have a secure attachment, let's say, if we didn't have a secure attachment, then we have to really think about where our challenge lies. And it's usually so deeply embedded in our subconscious, it's very, very difficult to work through on our own. It's something that we need to work through in some sort of therapeutic setting, generally speaking, because otherwise it comes out with a couple setting, even in situations, and there are individuals who do have ambivalent, avoidant attachments, who do get married. Those are the people that are generally the ones that don't last in marriage, and they're the ones that kind of get, generally speaking. Obviously, there are people who have had the ability to have secure attachment and get divorced because they're married to the ambivalent, the attached person, right? Because it obviously takes two. But avoidant people do struggle to stay in relationships if they haven't worked through their stuff. Okay? All right.
At what point do you say you've worked through your stuff? If you...
It's an ongoing process, but at least you want to try to work as much on this stuff as you can. You know, you want to feel, well, look, when you don't feel like you have to rely on somebody else.
Okay.
When you feel like you're just getting married to somebody because you really want to be with somebody, not because you feel like you have to be married, and then that's a really good place to come from. Okay. Self-reliance. So before we all get married, most of us or many of us live on our own. We have to learn some sort of sense of self-reliance, and we have to learn how to fend for ourselves in one way or another. And that's obviously a very good thing. The challenge then, though, is being able to continue to maintain some sort of self-reliance, but also while including somebody else in the picture. So for people who have very fixed ideas about how they want to be, right, that this is the way I'm going to live my life, and you just got to come in and stick yourself in there, they can have a pretty challenging time because the person probably has very different ideas about how they want to live their lives. And I've just recently worked with a couple, been married for 4 years, and this is a very happy story, I'm going to say that from the outset, where they just didn't realize that they had gotten themselves into this very challenging dynamic, where he actually was the one who made all the decisions for the relationship, and I mean all the decisions for the relationship, and she just kind of carried on. Now, she wasn't unhappy about that, because she liked the fact that he was very good at making decisions very quickly, and he was very bright, and he seemed to come up with some very good decisions. But he started to feel very frustrated, because he was like, I feel like the whole burden of the relationship is now on me. And I actually want her to, step it up and make some decisions as well. And she didn't even realize that this was even a need of his. But the other thing that he didn't realize was that he was making his decisions so quickly, literally at lightning speed, oftentimes without even consulting her, that she didn't even have an opportunity to even say anything. And she was just happy to go along. So he actually had to take a step back and actually realize, oh, somehow along the way, I have realized that I am so self-reliant. And I probably also, what he also learned was that he can't rely on his parents to make decisions. He actually had a bit of an ambivalent attachment where he didn't actually realize that this was something that he was struggling with. And once he was actually able to realize that and to work through that issue, he was able to step back and create some space. And like when he wanted to make a decision, he'd be able to include her, and they created a space where they were actually able to talk through things. Now they have a much more happy way of communicating with each other, and they are on the same page in terms of understanding how they're going to go about making decisions and including somebody else in the picture. Okay.
But what can you do before you get married on this realm?
Well, firstly, being aware of how self-reliant you are, and thinking about how you want to include somebody else in the picture. Right? So let's say you're really good at cooking. Let's say you're a fabulous cook, and you make these fabulous meals, and you just want to be cooking all by yourself. But let's say you marry someone who actually would like to also kind of share that kind of thing. So it's about really thinking through how you're going to include somebody in that. Maybe they're not a good cook, but maybe they want to actually be involved in the process. Maybe they want to do the shopping.
It's really hard to do hypothetically, because then you have to go through every realm and say, now let me imagine what he might want.
You can't do everything. You can't do it. You're right. That is a big ask. However, you can be aware of, thinking to yourself, am I overly territorial in any particular area? And
I would say that that's something you can start to apply while dating.
Yeah.
While dating, you can say, how much room am I making for this person in my schedule, right? Am I making room for them in my schedule, in my life? But to do it completely hypothetically when there's no partner would be a little
challenging. Yeah. Bottoming. Yeah, you're right. I do agree with that. That is a good thing. And actually that, I'm going to talk about creating space. So that's all sort of interconnected. But certainly feeling that you have to take over every single aspect of everyone's life is not going to be something that's going to be useful. And if you notice you're a control freak, for instance, that's really where, I mean, if you're just the sort of person who's so controlling, not just with yourself, but with your roommates or with your parents or with, if you feel like a control freak, that's really a thing where you could actually notice already without having to be in a relationship even. Okay, Okay, another thing that I think is really important, and this is something that Dr. David Olson, the one who created the Prepare and Enrich program, is very, very big on, is flexibility, right? And flexibility is known as one of the key ingredients that every person needs within themselves in order to create a successful relationship. Can anybody think why? Is it not obvious? It's pretty bloody obvious, right? It's the sort of thing that, you think theoretically, like that's pretty obvious, but there's so many people who really are very inflexible and they think, this is the way I think, and I'm not going to, I'll give you a great example. I've worked with so many couples, and it's really interesting, where the husband is very adamant about cleanliness. Very, very adamant. Obviously there's somewhere the woman is clean too, but there's somewhere the man is like, if I see any schmutz on the floor, he like flips his lid, and he can't handle it. And and the woman's like, look, I've been with the kids all day, I look like a frump, and of course I haven't gone to the dishes yet, that's kind of the last thing on my list. And the guy's like, I don't understand, you've been home all day, how could everything not be perfect and tidy in my house look like I've just walked into the cleanest room in the in the Waldorf Astoria, and so it's about really understanding that there's going to be times in your life when the house is going to look a little bit messier, and there's going to be times when you're going to be able to be a little bit more tidy, and there's going to be but not only that, in terms of just decision making, that you can't apply your way of making a decision to everything, and you're going to have to be, and this is where compromise, obviously, the concept of compromise really does come in. Now, obviously, people will say, well, look, this is my value, I value this thing, and I'm not willing to compromise on this. I can't really, but then there's a million ways, I must say, there are a million ways to slice just about anything, even when it comes to values. And I'm not saying that you have to give up on your values, but there's different ways of looking at the same value, right? Sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, I'm just thinking, what about a time not to be flexible? Can be too flexible, right? Where are the boundaries?
Yeah, well, that's where you have to, right. I'm not saying you have to completely bend completely over. It's about really sort of knowing where your boundaries are and being able to sort of go between this and that. And it's about really hearing the other person out, right?
Yeah.
So that's how we actually do it before all, right? We understand what our perspective is. We listen to the other person's perspective, and then we try to find some happy medium between this and that. It's not like the situation where the guy comes home and says, honey, this house has to be spotless. Says, okay, honey, I'll clean your house and I'll make it, that would be completely not normal, right? And it isn't normal, and some people do that, and it's chaval. But, and it takes a huge toll on the person and on the relationship overall. I'm trying to think other examples, just other examples would be just, just even about a good example I can think of is DIY home repairs, where, let's say one person feels like everything has to be DIY, we should never get a repair person in, we should always have to do everything ourselves, because that's the shita that they grew up with in their home. And the other person's like, I've never held a hammer, I don't even know which side's up, which side's down. And, it's a sort of thing where each one has to sort of introduce different aspects of their own world with one another, and find some sort of, either the person who's into DIY has to sort of get the other person sort of in on that, or they just have to hire outside help, or the person has to do it themselves. But there's actually a million other ways. And that's the thing that I think is really important to understand, is that there's actually a million different ways of looking at things. And the more that we just see that there's actually so much fluidity in the decisions, in the way that we make decisions, and in the options that there are, the more robust our lives can actually be, the more healthy our relationships can actually be. Okay, any questions on that? Any ideas? Thoughts? No, pretty straightforward. Okay, so the thing that I think is really important is space, and that's something that Yala was pointing out when we were talking about self-reliance. The importance of creating space space for our partner, but obviously maintaining space for ourselves. And something that actually happens a lot is that when we get into a relationship, and it's something that people just need to understand, is that when you do first get married, it's a sort of thing where you sort of, you don't know exactly, it's a challenging thing to do. Because beforehand, you kind of like, you'd be dating, let's say, if you weren't living together, and you'd, see each other, po v'sham, but you weren't like living the same space all the time. And it's something that a lot of couples do get freaked out about, is how am I going to actually maintain my own individual space while incorporating this other person? And that's the sort of thing that's important to like have a conversation about, in terms of thinking about how much space do you really need on a regular basis? How do I want that space to look? Do I need like a day by myself? I'll give you a great example. I was working with a young couple who'd been married for a couple of years, and they had totally different ideas about space. She was a musician and he was a physicist, and that just tells you how very different they were right there. Now, and I think it's actually it's wonderful that you have two very different skill sets and brains coming together. I think it's wonderful, but you have to really want to make that work. Now, the woman's idea, the musician, felt that her idea was, when I'm at work, I'm fully at work, and when I'm at home, I'm fully with my husband. Everything about my life's going to be about my husband. He had a completely different idea. He thought that he would be at work all day, and then he'd come home, and he'd go straight to the computer, and he'd stay on the computer for God knows how long, and then he'd like hang out with her for like a half an hour or something like that. Very different ideas about time and space, something that they hadn't really thought about or discussed. And they actually lived together before they got married even. So that's even more interesting, right? So this is the sort of thing that you really, you can't take for granted. You can't just assume that this is how your life is going to be. It's the sort of thing you really need to have some sort of awareness about in terms of your need for space, and your need to have conversations about it. So it's about really thinking about, what do I want in terms of my individual space and my individual time? What do I want for my couple time? And what do I want for my space? What do I want from his space? And how do I see our combined space? And once you get kids going on in there, that's a whole nother kettle of fish, obviously, as well. And you still need to maintain that couple time in order to really keep your relationship rocking, as they say. Okay, moving right along. Balance. So that's another thing that actually really kind of carries on a lot with space. How do they want to feel when they feel centered? And what is it that throws them off center? What are some of the things that they need to do in order to maintain that sense of centeredness? Now, what do I mean? What are some of the things that make us feel balanced? Let's just throw out some ideas. Anybody? Stability, but like more practical than that. Like
Routine for me.
Routine. So for you, having a routine. Great. You as well.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? What are some of the other things that make us feel like healthy and happy and like we're in balance?
Good nutrition. If you're a religious person, good religious life. That's,
right. Spiritual life, exercise,
sleep.
Good amounts of sleep. Right. So these are all different things that are really, really important. Now, there's some people who can sort of kind of maintain a balance when they're on their own, but they actually don't realize that once they get, and I've worked with people like this, who they get into a relationship and their whole life is completely thrown off balance because they actually aren't all that balanced before they get into a relationship, right? They actually aren't, it's not that they aren't balanced, but they aren't aware of the ingredients that they need in order to maintain a balance. They aren't aware of the fact that they need to eat regular square meals. They aren't aware of how much sleep they need. They aren't aware of the different hobbies that they need to incorporate into their lives to make them feel whole and happy.
Are you talking about like the first months of a relationship, which tend to be extremely overwhelming and intense, or are you just talking like because?
No, in general. I mean, even later on, people feel very thrown off balance.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but like if a person in the first couple of months is like, whacked off schedule and off, and is like, I mean, that kind of happens in an intense relationship, right? It doesn't mean that.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to.
Is
they
it
don't
a bad
have to. It may be. It doesn't mean maybe like if a person's spending like every waking minute with the person that they're dating, maybe they should like not do that, because maybe if that's throwing them off balance, then maybe that's also not helping them to really get into the relationship in the best way.
It's just like an emotionally intense thing. All of a sudden you're emotionally involved with a new person, and there's all kinds of questions. And
you want to be able to maintain your own sense of self, and not just suddenly absorb yourself in this other person, not know where you stop and start. And it's kind of already creating some sort of enmeshed attack, like that's kind of mimicking some sort of enmeshment there.
It's a dark when you're dating. You can be like thrown way out of balance because yesterday you were single and living a certain way, and all of a sudden you've moved to having somebody in your life, and also the emotions at the beginning can be extremely strong. Afterwards, they can calm down. So that's kind of where I was coming from. But why don't you ask your question,
Yeah, like these issues of flexibility, for example, it's very hard to feel like you're dating someone and of course want to be with him or her, but then after, you really don't know what's going to happen after you get married, because after, right now she or he will want to be with you all the time, but afterwards maybe it will be very different. So
well, that's why it's important to talk about it, right? It's important to be aware of it. It's important to also understand. I think it's really important also when you're just starting to date someone, not to have these 10-hour long dates. I don't think that's a wonderful thing, because it's not a very healthy way to start a relationship, because that's not how you're going to really be together. You know what I mean? You want to start slowly, so it doesn't become this emotionally overwhelming woohoo. You want it to be calm. That's just a better way to go. Because then you don't get emotionally overwhelmed.
And then you get to know a person if it's slowly.
Look, first you just want to see if you're even attracted to the person, if you like the person, if you feel some sense of chemistry, right? But you don't need to spend 10 hours with that person. And even if you do spend 10 hours with that person, you're not going to know. It's overwhelming to do in the beginning of a relationship. You want to do that, that's the sort of thing you want to already do once you already have a relationship. If you're just in dating mode, to go straight from dating to relationship mode without having done the dating, it's sort of cheat yourself a little bit, right? It's a bit of a cheat. You want to there's different stages of dating, right? And to jump from one to the other, you're kind of missing something. There's just something that's kind of missing a little bit.
That's all very logical and rational, but when it actually comes
we'll talk about it. Okay, resourcefulness. Okay, this is a very important thing as well. I think they're all really important. And this is something that I think a lot of people, when they do get married, is they sort of tend to forget themselves a little bit. They can tend to forget themselves a little bit. And they sort of they don't know how to really balance themselves with the other person. And sometimes they also start to forget about their own sense of value, their own sense of independence. They just sort of forget about themselves a little bit. They don't look after themselves as much. And I think it's really, really important to make a list of the things that you feel are your resources that you're bringing into a marriage. And it's a sort of thing that, if you're not fully, obviously we all know that we all have strengths. We all know, hopefully we all have a good sense of self, and we all have a good sense of identity and all that sort of thing. And that's, those are obvious things, but those sorts of things can, it can take a little bit of a hit when we first get into a relationship, particularly when we do enter marriage, because we're still sort of negotiating all these new ways of being with our partners. So the more that we feel good about ourselves, and the more that we're aware of the wonderful things that we bring into a relationship, the more we'll actually be able to maintain our sense of self-esteem and our sense of strength and all that sort of thing. So some of the things we want to think about are, the fact that we have a strong strength of character, that we have the ability to adapt to different situations and environments, the fact that we have the ability to turn a rainy day into a fun day, the fact that we might have an upbeat personality. These are just some examples of things that we probably value about ourselves, but if we're not really clear about the fact that we value this about ourselves, when our partner starts to, criticize us, right, we might start to forget that. And criticism is the thing that you don't want to have happen in a relationship, but sometimes it will happen, especially in the beginning of a relationship. And you want to be able to really stand strongly within yourself and be able to not necessarily I'm not saying get confrontational, but just to feel strong and good and healthy within yourself. And it's the sort of thing that a lot of people do forget about. And some people do have a tendency, men and women alike, I see this both ways, where they become a little bit of a doormat because they aren't aware of their own strength that they're bringing into a relationship. And I think it's so important to always be aware of that when you're coming into a relationship. Okay. Yes?
How do you, I know someone who completely fits into that category.
Okay.
And how do you rehabilitate someone that has kind of had such sort of a dependency, they kind of lost themselves as you described, and then they need to build themselves back up.
Right. So you mean being in a relationship with that person, or just being a friend of that person? There's a difference. Okay. I don't want to put you on the spot. Let's say let's take both those two different scenarios. Okay. Let's say if you're in a relationship with that sort of person, then basically the first thing to do is to not take advantage of that, which is something that most people would automatically do, because every relationship is a dynamic, right? So if one person sort of acts a bit doormatish, the other person is going to react, and they're going to sort of take on a more of a controlling sort of stance with them, right? So to be aware that the person is acting like a doormat, and hold yourself back from doing that, and to say, look, you're acting like a bit of a doormat here. I'm struggling to respect you because you're not standing up for yourself. Maybe this is something you want to really work on. That would be one thing to do in the context of a relationship. And obviously do it as gently and as gently as possible, or ask them how they feel. Like, do you feel like you don't have, do you feel like you're not an equal, or how do you feel like an equal in this relationship? Like, maybe asking like letting it go in their court, so they could even say, oh, well, actually I feel like a doormat, or I don't really feel like I have any power in this relationship. Yeah? Now, as a friend, okay, let's do it that way. If a friend is seeing that sort of situation, and then I spoke to someone on the phone today who told me that she just found out that a good friend of hers is getting divorced, and she was in an abusive relationship, and she noticed that her friend was in an abusive relationship, and she didn't say anything, and she says she feels like she's kicking herself now that she never stood up and never said anything. And I said to her, look, you can't kick yourself about that, because the truth is, even if you had said something, she might not have been in a position to hear it, and sometimes people need to come to that place in their own, right? So that's one thing to know. But the other thing to know is that if you do see someone who is you feel in a sort of an abusive relationship, or in a very unequal relationship, let's say, where you just feel like there's some real power imbalance, it just doesn't feel quite right, what you could say as a friend, and it might fall on deaf ears, but you might actually help somebody, is you might say, look, I get the sense that I'm wondering whether you're feeling lost in this relationship. Just throwing that out there. I'm wondering how you're feeling. Just even say how you're feeling. And, if you ever want to talk to me, I'm here for you. Rather than judging it and saying, because there are some, believe it or not, sadly, there are some couples who feel, I'm not talking about full-on abuse. Obviously, it's not healthy or good. But there are situations where you might not like that relationship. You might not like a particular relationship style where you see couples falling into more traditional categories where the wife is very wifey and the husband is more husbandy, for lack of a better expression. That might not be for you, but it might actually be for them. It might suit them really well. And it's something they might have actually negotiated, and they actually feel good about it, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, where there's a problem is where you feel like there's a power thing, where he or she, and the roles are reversed now too, very much so.
It can be a she.
It
goes both ways.
Absolutely. It absolutely goes both ways. And sadly, I've worked with many abused men. I've worked with many abused men over the years as well. And it's a very hard situation, because it really affects their sense of masculinity, completely throws them off, and whatever. And I've worked with clients, once again, who are not open to receiving feedback. And I've worked with people who haven't even been able to get into relationships, who really struggled with criticism and being able to hear differences of opinion. And sometimes, and often this will come, this would be an imago issue, right? I had a situation once where I worked with someone who was a very successful person, top of their field, and he was able to get into relationships, and he even had very lengthy relationships, but the second that a woman would start to say something that sort of went against something that he believed in or whatever, he was out of there. He just could not handle hearing any sort of criticism. And when we worked on some of his earlier relationship stuff, what came up was that his mother had been very, very, very hypercritical of him. And to the point where he could not say anything to her in a way that she would be able to hear him. And this was something that was actually playing out in our relationship. Whereas if I said anything if I would make any sort of suggestion, even in the gentlest way, he would perk up to that straight away. And he'd just let it run like the wind. And it was something that he really did struggle with. And sadly, he didn't actually remain because he couldn't actually handle it. And I think he's been through many different therapists as a result. So it's the sort of thing that we need to be aware of that issue, because if we aren't good at receiving feedback, if we aren't good at being open to suggestions and open to different viewpoints and ways of looking at things, then this is going to be a real problem for us in terms of creating a healthy relationship and letting somebody in. Right. Okay. So we got 3 more to go and then we're done. Respect. It might sound obvious that we need to receive respect, and we need to be able to give respect, and this is the sort of thing where we need to be able to, in order to be able to receive, in order to be able to give respect, in order to feel respected from somebody else, we need to first be able to respect ourselves. And we need to really be able to think, we need to be able to think through what are the things that actually make us feel respected. And this is something that I work with so many individuals on, they really aren't aware. I'm working with this lovely young man now who's like in his early 20s, and he was completely treated like a dish rag by his girlfriend. She cheated on him back to front. She just spoke to him in the most horrific of ways. And this is a man who is a really, really bright guy. You would not believe how intelligent this person is. But nevertheless, he had, for whatever reason, I mean, we know what the reasons are because he and I have done some work together, because of some of the relationship stuff that he encountered with his own parents, his sense of masculinity has been eroded. And he doesn't have a strong sense of self. He doesn't have a strong sense of self-respect, even though he's an incredibly intelligent human being. And he's now looking back and he's like, I can't believe I allowed myself. He was in a relationship for 2 or maybe even 3 years. 3 years of his life. He was in a relationship with a woman who was constantly saying things, and he was like trying to figure out how did I let that go by? How did I let that go by? And he's now looking back and he's really seeing how he didn't allow himself to stand up for himself at various points when he should have. And now we're working through how he needs to really have a sense of self-respect. We're working through all the different things that make him feel respected and make him feel strong and make him feel like the man that he wants to be. So what I'd like to suggest for you guys is to really think about what is the sort of language that what is the sort of language that a person uses when they're showing a sense of respect? What is the sort of language that you want to use? What is the language that you're willing to receive from the person that you're with? What's acceptable versus unacceptable language, behavior, attitudes? These are the sorts of things we need to think about. These are things that we can think about before we get into a relationship. This is not something we have to be in a relationship with somebody to really know these things, because this is the sort of thing we encounter every day, right? With people we work with our friends, with our parents, with our siblings, with our colleagues. It's the sort of thing that comes up day in, day out for sure. And we also have to realize that, there's a time for jokiness, and then there's a time where joking is really not acceptable, right? And where actually things people will say will actually be hurtful. And the other thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is putting themselves down, right? And this is something that a lot of us have encountered with siblings or parents, where our parents would have put us down. So we continue to do it ourselves, and then we wonder why people don't respect us, and we're not even aware of the fact that we're actually doing that ourselves, and we're opening ourselves up to a very challenging, difficult situation. Okay. Boundaries. That's something that also has come up with, with regards to flexibility and all these sorts of things. Comes up with balance, but basically, in terms of boundaries, it's about really figuring out what we want to allow into our lives, and where we have to really say to ourselves, look, I need some time and space myself right now. In terms of knowing how much time to give a person, how much, maybe how much of a chance to give a person in terms of getting to know them, but also what is it we're willing to tolerate. And I know that's not a great word when you're thinking about being in a relationship, but what it is that we have to have obviously a certain level of healthy, good, happy expectations, but then there's also certain things that we might not love every single thing that a person does with us and for us and whatever. Even another really important thing that kind of goes along with this is gift giving, right? In terms of, some people are really, there's a book about this by Tom, anybody know this book? But there's like seven different types of gift giving. Do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember, Tom Hardy or some very American type name. I can't remember the name of it. It's like the seven languages of love, and basically it's like there are 7 different ways in which people show how they love their partners, and some people expect that their partner has to treat them a certain way, and if they aren't treated a certain way in terms of like the gifts that they receive or the way that their partner shows love, they feel unloved. Like, let's say a person is used to, their parents were very big gift givers, like actual material gift givers, right? So they might expect that their partner is going to be giving them gifts all the time, but for that person, maybe their parents didn't show their love through gifts. They show their love through affection, or through language, or through service, through doing things for them, through doing things with them, right? So this is also something that kind of comes along under the umbrella of boundaries, because these are certain things that we sort of have expectations of for ourselves and have expectations for our partners. And we need to sort of negotiate some of these boundaries sometimes. We have to have some sort of fluid, a sense of what it is that makes us feel good, what it is that makes us feel loved, what it is that makes us feel whole, but also understand that the person that we're going to be with might not have those same kinds of ideas about things, and find a way of sort of merging those two ideas together. Okay? Another thing with regards to boundaries, and this is something that also comes under time and space, is, and this might be a really good exercise in terms of like thinking about how we're going to do it now versus how we're going to do it when we're in a relationship, is creating a pie chart for ourselves of how we currently spend our time on our own. And then like literally see, how do we divide up our time? How much time are we at work? How much time do we play? How much time do we exercise? How much time do we spend? All sorts of things that are really, really important that take up a lot of our time. And then think about where we're going to actually carve out time and space for our partners. Right? Where do we actually see our partners fitting into our lives? What are the things that are going to have must stay? And what are the things that, let's say everything must stay, right? But how are we going to like kind of consolidate our time to some degree so we can actually let our partner into that time and space? The other thing is that a lot of times people, when they first get married and they have kids, and it's a really interesting thing where it's a sort of thing that, in some ways, it's a difficult thing to put on paper, because people don't realize how actually inefficient they are sometimes until they actually don't have time, right? So like very often you'll see like, you know, mothers with like 9, 10 children, and you think like, how do you look like you're a well-functioning human being? Like, I'm struggling, I've got like, you know, only this and this going on, and you've got like 10 kids. How are you functioning? And it's just an amazing thing how, especially as your children do grow up and they do become more functioning for themselves and more, you know, fend for themselves, and it's a sort of thing where it's a hard thing to fathom how time is so flexible and fluid, and how much more efficient we actually can be if we really do master our time and really take our time more seriously, so to speak. So I mean, I think it's really important thing to really think through, how boundaried are we with our time? Are we spending like oodles and oodles of time doing things that are just time wasters and that really, you know, we don't really need to be doing? You know, that's an area maybe where that can go. We can actually create more time and space for our partner. Okay. And last but not least, forgiveness. Now this, it might seem obvious that yes, we have to be able to be forgiving and to give forgiveness and receive forgiveness. However, this is not the sort of thing that everybody grew up with, or not something that everybody witnessed in their own families. And very often people get very caught up in, I am right and you are wrong, and that's just the way it is. And they don't understand that there's obviously many different perspectives, and that's something we talked about a lot, being balanced and seeing fluidity and flexibility and all that sort of thing. But that all ties into forgiveness as well, and being able to see other people's perspectives on things. And the more that we could stand back and see the other person's perspective, the richer we actually are for it. And basically, at the end of the day, when we really stop and think about it, marriage is really about growth, right? So I say to people straight out, if you're not into growth, marriage isn't for you. Because marriage is a very growth-orientated thing. It's the sort of thing that challenges you to the core, especially in the very beginning. It just completely can block you completely out of this world, because you're with this other person who didn't grow up in the same household as you. Even if you came from the same city or the same, you know, with the same culture, you went to the same schools or whatever, each family is their own little microcosm. It's their own little olam bifnei atzmo, really. And it's just amazing how every family does things almost completely differently from the other. You know, you think just marrying into a different culture can be completely different, but even without the cultural differences, there can be a tremendous amount of difference. And I've seen this with couples who were from the same exact city, went to the same schools, had the same group of friends, and yet their parents were like, the way that their parents dealt with things was night and day, and they really didn't realize how many challenges that they were going to have going into the marriage. And they ended up having a lot of challenges 4 or 5 years later, especially once the kiddies were there. And it was much harder to deal with those things because they took a lot of things for granted. So, just to sum up, the key thing that I'm hoping everyone gets out of this little talk that I gave here is that the more we are aware of the things that we know about ourselves, the more we are aware of all the possibilities that there are in terms of how to relate to somebody else, the better off our marriages will be. And the more that we, I guess, can really create time and space for somebody else, even before we find that person, even before that person actually exists in reality, the better, the healthier our relationship will be. You'll find that struggling is much less, and you'll be happier and better for it.
Thank you, that was really very interesting.
Thank you.
Your words reflect something I heard a woman express to me a couple of years ago, where she said, I'm working on building inside myself a clique, so that, like a comfortable place that when a person comes into my life, there'll be it's as if you're like decorating your inner bedroom,
Yeah.
You're like putting carpets and curtains and whatever, and they're not just leaving it this bare cave.
Yeah.
And that was really nice to hear from her. But I did notice that that communication is not on this list. Like all of these things you're supposed to discuss with your partner.
Yeah.
Communication is a category in and of itself, which I think that one should also develop when one is single with all.
I agree.
Of course you agree. Communication is like. So
But
why is it not on the list?
It's not on the list because I thought because it permeates every single thing here.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I mean, that's why I didn't put it on the list, because it's so mubame and love. And it's also, I think, and often people just sort of roll their eyes and say it's so trite and communication it's an enormous thing, actually. There's so many different, there's books and books and there's workshops. In fact, I was just supposed to give a workshop just to newlyweds. There's a 3-hour session workshop just on communication of itself. But these are the things that I felt are really important, that most people aren't really aware of. I think before they get into a relationship, everyone's aware of the fact that they need to have good communication skills, but that's also the sort of thing that you're going to have different communication styles, and that's the sort of thing where you're going to have to negotiate, but you're going to have to negotiate through all this stuff.
I just feel like communication is something one can also practice as a single, become aware of as a single, become aware that there are different styles of as a single, and not just wait for,
Absolutely, and
do it with friends. You sometimes have tense moments with friends, and there are ways to get through it, which will be the same ways that you're going to be trying to get, what I mean?
No, you're absolutely.
The same way you said that all those things apply when you're single, you should practice them. I think communication is the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting, because I give another talk where I talk about other things that are even like more basic than this, and communication is definitely on there. But I guess I felt that everything, like communication, kind of fell into everything, so maybe that's why I didn't sort of put it in here, because you have to kind of understand all these things first and then be able to communicate them to yourself and then communicate them to your partner. So maybe I didn't really sort of express that enough, but thank you, I take that on board, thank you. Anybody else have any ideas, suggestions, comments, thoughts? Everybody ready to go home? Okay, thank you very much for staying and listening, and if you have any questions,